Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Gary. I'm a professor in the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to our final lecture of the President's Lecture Series for this academic year. We will be hearing from Dr. Taylor Owen with a talk entitled, "Why is Everyone Mad at Tech?" But just before we get to that, I did have a few announcements and acknowledgements to make. First of all, I just wanted to thank all of the people whose work has made the lecture series possible. So that would be the committee members, besides myself, Nathan Radke, Melanie Chaparian, and Chandra Hodgson. Also, Humber's media services technicians, who are the tech behind why everyone's mad at tech. The president's executive assistant, Deborah Green, and executive receptionist, Jessica Camara. And of course, Humber's president, Chris Whitaker, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but without whose support, again, none of this would be possible. We very much appreciate it. I would also just like to welcome everyone who is watching via live stream at the Lakeshore and Orangeville campuses. And I would like to extend a special welcome to a few students that we have in attendance today. I believe we may have a few from the Technology Certificate in General Arts and Sciences program, studying with Bernard Ho. And we have a few students from that same program, but in the university transfer stream, who are taking Introduction to Philosophy with, well, me. So welcome, glad you made it. May I just remind everyone to also silence your cell phones if you would, because if you don't, perhaps you know, our speaker will get mad at you as well as being mad at tech, and we wouldn't want that to happen. And as you listen to the lecture, don't forget to jot down some questions. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. The one thing I'll just ask you to do is to speak into the microphone for your questions. That's pretty important because we have some folks who are watching on the live stream, and we're also recording this for posterity. And so if you don't speak into the mic, we won't be able to hear your question. So we would appreciate that. And if you need a microphone brought to you, then we can certainly assist with that as well. Just put up your hand and we're on it. And following the talk, we will be holding a little reception here. That's what all the stuff is over there. So we will have some light refreshments, which is code for the students in the room for free food. So that's afterwards. It's a nice opportunity if you can stick around to carry on the conversation a little bit more informally. So now I'd like to turn the floor over to, well, me again. I offered this job to some of my students, but nobody took me up on it, to give an introduction to our speaker today. So Dr. Taylor Owen is the Beaverbrook Chair in Media, Ethics, and Communications and Associate Professor at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. Prior to this, he served as an assistant professor of digital media and global affairs at the University of British Columbia and was the research director of the Tao Center? Tao Center. I figured I was 50-50 on that. The Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University. With a doctorate from the University of Oxford, he has held research positions at Yale University, the London School of Economics, and the International Peace Research Institute. Dr. Owen has earned many professional accomplishments, including being a Trudeau and Banting Scholar, an Action Canada and Public Policy Forum Fellow, and the 2016 Public Policy Forum Emerging Leader. In 2011, he founded OpenCanada.org, which is a publication whose purpose is to explain, analyze, and tell stories about the complex and rapidly shifting world of foreign policy and international affairs. He also sits on the board of directors for the Center for International Governance Innovation and on the Governing Council of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. But that doesn't keep him busy enough. He likes to do a little writing on the side, it turns out. So in addition to all of this, he is the author or co-author of several books, including Disruptive Power, The Crisis of the State in the Digital Age, The World Won't Wait, Why Canada Needs to Rethink Its Foreign Policies, Journalism After Snowden, The Future of the Free Press in the Surveillance State, and Platform Press, How Silicon Valley Re-Engineered Journalism. So we are very pleased to have him participate in our series today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Taylor Owen.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to put this down a little bit. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and get to speak to you and people online. Um, so, just for a bit of context, I've been for the last number of years studying the relationships between emerging digital technologies on one side and the broader social and political effects that they're having. And for a long time, this was a generally positive narrative that I'm going to talk about a little bit. Digital technologies were seen as being fundamentally empowering and even aligned with democratic interests. Think of things like the Arab Spring and a bunch of social movements using digital technologies. But I think we're in a really different moment now, one where a lot of people are starting to question the effect that these technologies are having on our personal lives, on our society, on our democracy even. So I want to dive into that a little bit in this lecture. Like, why are we seeing this turn now? And why are we all starting to, or a lot of people starting to push back against the role these technologies are having in our lives and in our society? And I think it's important to kind of step back from some of this day-to-day criticism we're seeing. I mean, in the last couple of years, there's just been constant news about Facebook scandals or data breaches or the hacking of elections, or it's just one thing after another. And I think you can, when we're caught in these news cycles of negative press, we can kind of lose sight of of the change that's actually happening. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit today. So I think to do this, though, it's helpful to step back almost a decade. So 10 years ago, Obama won his first presidential election as the first social media candidate, right? He was immersed in these technologies and he benefited tremendously from them. But at the time, again, this is only 10 years ago, it's worth remembering that Facebook was only 4 years old and it only had about 100 million users. Fast forward 4 years to Obama's re-election. This photo of the Obamas on re-election night became the most shared photo in history at the time. Facebook was now 8 years old and had grown to 1 billion users. And I think it's fair to say that the Obama administration and Silicon Valley as an industry had a mutually beneficial relationship. The sector remained largely unregulated. And there was still this perception of alignment between democracy and positive civic engagement and the tools that these technologies were providing. Fast forward 4 more years to his final speech as president, in which he says that we are growing isolated from one another by competing facts. And social media, he says, has created a dust cloud of nonsense. So it's a tradition for presidents to kind of use their final speech after the election and before the inauguration to give kind of a warning, their last warning call to the American people. Eisenhower did this really famously around the military-industrial complex. Obama's was even more serious. He was warning that democracy itself was at risk by these technologies. So how did we go then in this 8-year period from this alignment between the democratic interests and technologies and 8 years later to Obama saying these technologies threaten democracy? So one answer is this happened, right, a month before he gave that speech. And I'm going to return to Trump in a little bit because he's central to a lot of this narrative right now. But the reality, I think, is that the 2016 presidential election that Trump won actually was a real turning point in this conversation. It is the start of the techlash that we now call, as often called, right? And it is a defining moment in how this discourse changed. And I want to give a little bit of shape to what I think that techlash looks like. So why are people angry? The techlash has had a number of components to it. One is that journalism has taken a pretty significant shift. It used to be that tech journalism was mostly about gadget reviews, right? It was about the newest phone or the latest Apple launch event or whatever it might be. journalism has changed radically on how it approaches technology. It now sees technology as or tech sector as a node of power in society to be held to account alongside other nodes of power, big industry, government, whatever it might be. A whole range of research organizations have emerged that are kind of shedding a pretty critical light on the way technologies are impacting society. Workers inside tech companies themselves are starting to push back. At Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, you're seeing staff uprisings against things like the company's use of AI in collaboration with the US military, for example, or the use of facial recognition to track down illegal immigrants through ICE in the US. The gender discrimination is kind of rampant in many of these companies. So you're seeing this kind of upswell from within, this techlash from within companies. Politicians have changed. 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been crazy for a Western democratic political leader to speak aggressively, critically about technology, and that's changed. Across the Western world, you have leaders pushing back and speaking quite aggressively against these tech platforms. And maybe most significantly, public attitude, partly as a consequence of these other aspects of this techlash, have really shifted on their perceptions of technology. Just to give you a couple of examples. Most Americans don't trust tech companies to prevent foreign manipulation of elections. A majority of Americans think social media hurts rather than helps democracy. 8 in 10 Canadians think Facebook is untrustworthy with their personal data. And 6 in 10 Canadians say Facebook will have a negative impact on the next federal election. Right? This is a pretty remarkable shift from where we were a few years ago, where the perception of these technologies were a couple of years ago. And the result, I think, is this kind of growing outcry. But it's an outcry that people are starting to also push back against. And I just want to flag this here, because I think it's an important statement to mark. So Jeff Jarvis, who's said this, is a very prominent journalism scholar. And he's calling this moment a moral panic. Right? So he's saying, I fear we are rushing headlong into what he calls a moral panic, choosing to believe a dark image of the world and then to blame its ills on technology. That is sort of what I want to check against here. So is this a real set of concerns, or is it a moral panic, an irrational pushback? So with that in mind, I'm going to do 3 things. I want to give you a sense of why I think people are upset, the character of this debate. I want to make the case that I think this isn't just a case of bad actors using technology. There's actually some problems embedded in our technologies themselves. And then we'll just end with a bit of the conversation about, or highlighting some of the policy avenues we have to maybe mitigate some of these harms. So first, what are the social costs and why are people upset? The first is that I think these sets of technologies, what I'd broadly call as platform-based technology companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, right? The platforms that are mediating the way we receive information, the way how we interact with each other in the digital environment. I think they're affecting the quality of information in our democracy. So one place to start here, of course, is the whole controversy over fake news. And now fake news has become appropriated by Trump in particular as kind of the Stalin-esque critique of the free press, right? That everything that he doesn't believe in is fake news. But fake news actually, for a moment, was something really particular and something quite specific. The term was largely coined in its current iteration by a BuzzFeed journalist, a Canadian actually, in Toronto, named Craig Silverman. And he found that in the 3 months leading up to the 2016 presidential election, the top 20 fake stories on Facebook generated more engagement than the top 20 stories from legitimate news organizations in the 3 months leading before the election, right? In this critical point in a democracy. And he called this phenomena fake news, which he defined as misinformation made to look like legitimate journalism. Now, Platforms have said they're really fighting back against this, and they're doing a lot, to their credit, to push back against it. But the problem continues largely unabated. In 2018, Craig did a similar study and found that the top 50 news stories on Facebook generated only 7% fewer engagements than in 2017 and more than in 2016. So the problem remains there. And the problem, he argues, is that we are undermining the authenticity and accuracy of information in our society. And that the way the platforms work, which I'll get into in a minute, might actually be built in a way to not reinforce and promote quality content, but actually to spread and validate inaccurate content. And I'll talk about, just pause on that for a minute, because I'll come back to that. And to him, this raises serious questions about how we evolve society and democracy in a world where the assumption of trust can be exploited and where trust is no longer the default in our information ecosystem. And I think there's probably not a better example of this right now than the anti-vax movement that has spread globally. It's spread largely on social media. And it's done so in a way that is kind of using the tools that are provided by these technologies. So YouTube's recommendation algorithm, for example, steers viewers in a disproportionate way towards anti-vax content. Right? On Facebook, huge anti-vax communities have emerged in closed private groups, like Facebook groups. Also on Facebook, anti-vax content circulates by searching. This search result here is a recent one where you search for vaccines, not anti-vax or vaccine skepticism, but vaccines, and all of the search results are anti-vax content, right? So that is the platform pushing that kind of content to users. Even Facebook runs an ad recommendation system, right, where you can query certain groups to target with ads. This is a recent one where they offered 900,000 people interested in vaccine controversies that you could target with advertising, right? So this is a powerful tool for spreading this false information. Even on Amazon, CNN recently found that of the 18 books and movies listed on the search page for vaccines, 15 were anti-vax books or movies. So the results clearly have been really harmful. Measles was largely eradicated a decade ago. It's now spreading around the Western world. In Canada, we've seen, I'm originally from Vancouver, and there's been a significant outbreak of measles in Vancouver. Europe had 41,000 cases last year, where the year before they only had 5,000. The World Health Organization has warned that vaccine hesitancy has become one of the top global health threats. And the head of the NHS in the UK argues that fake news on social media has caused the crisis. Quote. So that's just one example, I think, of some social costs of this misinformation spreading, or the quality of information degrading. So on the one hand, in our information space, we have that phenomena where the quality is degrading. On the other hand, we're seeing the collapse of the institution in our society that used to be the place we relied on for quality information, which is journalism. So the business model for journalism has simultaneously collapsed as we've embedded ourselves in this digital infrastructure. Facebook and Google Ads now account for almost all new digital advertising, which was the thing that used to fund. Advertising used to be the primary economic model for journalism. And the effects of this have been really significant. In the US, since 2007, they've lost 45% of all newsroom, digital and legacy journalism jobs in the country. So I would argue we're losing this backstop of reliable information that was once provided by journalism. That was the civic good that journalism provided. A second social harm here that I think is why people are upset is that increasingly this digital infrastructure is dividing us. It's dividing us against each other in our society. On these platforms, you've probably all heard about filter bubbles and information silos and all of this kind of thing. But the key point is that we are each given information in this ecosystem that is designed to often reinforce and to harden our biases. This is an example of a study that was done of the US election, the US 2016 election, and found deep ideological clustering of the political discourse. Partisans were speaking with partisans, sharing with partisans, and in turn receiving deeply partisan information. But the problem is more than that. It's not just how we share information, how we're exposed to information. It's actually how information can be used to target us in a much more poignant way. This is an example that Julia Angwin, a reporter at the time at ProPublica, found, which was that Facebook users could be targeted via the ad targeting system that I mentioned before for terms such as, quote, Jew hater, how to burn Jews, and a history of why Jews ruin the world. Right? This was a targeting criteria that the Facebook AI gave to people to allow content to be targeted to them. No human designed these systems. This is the AI doing it. But its explicit purpose is micro-targeting and division. Right? And this can have a real social effect. Around the world, we've seen these tools used to incite violence. In Myanmar, for example, the UN has said that these very same tools have been used to incite genocide. In Brazil, WhatsApp and the sharing of information in that system, in this very closed system of WhatsApp, has been used to foster violence in Brazil, Sri Lanka, and in India. In India, this system has 250 million users in WhatsApp alone. And the Western world isn't sort of immune to this. One study in Germany found that in any town where the per-person Facebook usage rose by 1 standard deviation above the national average, so where Facebook usage increased a little bit, there was an increase on the attacks on refugees increased by 50%. Right? So you see this correlation between this kind of activity and an actual physical violence. The third thing, and I'll get beyond the listing a bunch of bad things soon, but I think it's important to give some structure to what we're seeing. The third thing is that I think we're seeing real psychological effects. People are starting to notice this on themselves and on their students and on their children. What do I mean by this? A number of studies have started looking at the effect of immersion in digital technologies, whether they be our phones or digital communities and digital lives, is leading to significant spikes in anxiety and depression amongst teenagers. So it's a serious phenomena right now that is being rigorously studied. The picture of these iGen teens, which these studies often call this generation, emerging from this data is of a lonely, dislocated generation. Phone use is correlated with being less likely to see friends, significant decreases in sleep, and more depression, and increasingly to suicide. This is actually pretty remarkable. In the US, between 2010 and 2015, teen suicide attempts increased by 23%, and the number of successful suicides between 13 and 18-year-olds increased by 31% in the US in this 5-year period. And a whole host of studies are looking at the effect of and the role of immersion in these digital technologies and that relationship to suicide. One study found that teens who spent 5 hours a day online were 71% more likely to have at least one suicidal risk factor than those who spent less than an hour. I think this is we have to be aware and look very critically, I think, at the effect this is having on society. As a former Facebook VP of user growth, kind of ironically has argued, Shamath Palwachadi, he says, the short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops we've created are destroying how society works. And if this isn't horrifying enough, what is happening to our even younger children, I think, and I have a 5-year-old, should terrify us. On YouTube Kids, for example, violence against child characters, age-inappropriate sexualization, and even suicide attempts embedded in kids' videos runs rampant. Some of these videos with hundreds of millions of views. Inside the YouTube Kids app, which is the protected space within YouTube for kids content. A recent controversy occurred just a couple of weeks ago when parents found popular shows on YouTube Kids re-uploaded with spliced-in clips of a man joking of how to cut himself. Remember, kids, he says in the videos, sideways for attention, long ways for results. Right? So this is embedded in kids' videos inside an app designed for kids' consumption of cartoon content. Finally, the final thing I'll flag here is that, and this could be a whole other lecture, but that ultimately I think there's some vulnerabilities in our elections coming from these technologies. Using the tools provided by the attention economy, by this ecosystem, foreign and domestic actors alike can powerfully shape the behavior of voters. And I think this can take a lot of forms. The Cambridge Analytica case and the way the Trump campaign, for example, used these tools is a really powerful warning sign, I think. Trump campaign, for example, ran 50,000 simultaneous different micro-targeted ads a day during the election, and they evolved, all 50,000 of those evolved every day using AI to target different people in different ways, depending on what was the most effective. I think we're vulnerable to cyber attacks and kind of acute attacks during elections, and this can have a real effect on how an election plays out. The Podesta email hack, for example, during the 2016 US election was an example of this. It happened to Macron during the last French election. But I think it can also, the risk here can be much more subtle. I just want to give you one example of what I mean here. One of the things the Russian government or the organizations affiliated with the Russian government did in the 2016 election, we now know retroactively, is that in the year before the election, they built up Facebook pages of prominent figures in the African American community. So they had one for Beyonce, they had one for Malcolm X, and the intention was to build as many followers in those communities as possible. So they just posted fan content. So the Beyonce one just showed concert clips and gossip about her or whatever it might be. And then 2 days before the election, they weaponized those pages by posting content that was designed to suppress the African American vote. And what they found through a whole host of testing before was that the message that would do that most effectively was about Bill Clinton's, not Hillary Clinton's, welfare reform initiatives that disproportionately affected the African American community. So they blasted that message out using these pages 2 days before the election to just slightly suppress the African American vote. So how do you spot that, right? Like, that's just a legitimate page running over the course of a year, and then at the last minute it gets weaponized. I think that shows how sort of vulnerable we are in this information space. So that's kind of my map of like why this tech lash is happening, why people are mad at technology. The second nugget I want to make, though, is that these costs, these social costs, these reasons people are upset, are not the result of individual bad actors, like the Russian government or like the guy uploading those YouTube things. I mean, they are clearly culpable here, but the problem is deeper. The problem is embedded in the design of this infrastructure itself. It's embedded in the technologies, and the problem is structural. So let me just give you the ways I think that is the case. The first structural problem is the way these platforms have been monetized. Right? So it's worth remembering that for a long time, the Google and Facebook and Amazon didn't make money, right? Their valuation was based on their numbers of users, the amount of time people spend on their platforms, right? Their growth. They weren't profitable. But that changed. And these platforms in this information space landed on two ways of driving profit. One was and both of these ways are grounded in how they commoditized the data they collected about us, right? So they built huge user bases in the billions of users, hundreds of millions or billions of users, collected huge amounts of data about each of those users, and then found ways to commoditize that. And the two ways were they figured out how to use that data, those data sets, those profiles, to make us stay longer on the sites, to use the products more, right? To like incentivize us to use these products or to give us content that would design us to stay on there longer. And they allowed these data to allow other people to target us with content effectively that is designed to change our behavior, right? Generally advertising, right? So they will use these data profiles to target us. These two twin sort of uses of data are often called the attention economy on one hand, and then surveillance capitalism on the other. The use of data to allow people to target attention to us, designed to change our behavior. And so let me just tell you a little bit what I mean by this. So in the information space, or the information economy, it used to be that broadcast media, so our newspapers, our television stations, our radio stations, had a near monopoly on access to large audiences, right? So if you're an advertiser and you want to reach a particular demographic, you have to go to a publication that claims to have that demographic as their audience. And you buy an ad in there, and they send it out to everybody that subscribes to their product, right? Advertising technologies, or ad tech, has totally upended this model. And this is kind of one of the core aspects of this infrastructure. What happens now is data brokers or platform companies build incredibly detailed profiles of each of their users. These could be in like the 20, 30,000 inferred variables about one user, right? So highly detailed pictures of our lives. And these profiles are then traded. They're bought and sold as commodities. And they can be used to customize content to us, designed to do these two things, to keep our attention and to change our behavior. And they can infer often our moods, our desires, and our fears. Facebook, for example, has told advertisers it knows when a teenager feels insecure, worthless, and in need of a confidence boost, right? The perfect moment to put a message in front of them designed to change their behavior. So this turned out to be just this immensely powerful thing for selling ads, which is why most digital, as I mentioned, almost all digital ads is on these platforms now, because it works, right? But it can also be used for any kind of behavioral change, not just making people buy things. If you are a political campaign and you want to change how people vote, if you're an activist and you want to change how people believe in the thing you're an activist on, if you're a foreign actor and you want to divide people against each other, make people hate each other, the tools can be used for any of those purposes. So that's, on the one hand, you have this sort of, the way the system's been commoditized, I think, is fueling some of these problems. The second challenge is that these platforms operate at such scale, right? Like the scale is immense at the amount of content that's flowing through them. Just to give you a sense, on Amazon there are 1 billion transactions a day. Facebook handles over 6 billion transactions of information a day and translates content in real time into 4,000 languages. 500 hours are uploaded to YouTube every minute of content, right? So the scale is mind-boggling of the amount of information flowing through these platforms as filter points. And so the editorial function they have to provide of sorting that information, deciding if it's legal, deciding who sees what, is mind-boggling. And the way they do it is not through humans, because that just wouldn't scale, but through AI, right? So the second structural challenge here is the way AI and automation are used to decide what is seen in this environment, who sees what, whether we as individuals are seen and heard in the digital space, and to filter content to us and to target us with content to change our behavior, right? Like all of these things are determined by AI. They are literally what makes this system scale. But AI, as we are increasingly learning, and I think we're having sort of beginning a societal debate about this, AI are often largely unknowable, even to the systems that created them, right? The algorithms are hidden from view, they're constantly evolving, they aren't built in any discrete way by humans. They're core commercially driven, right? So they're designed to do these things, and that they're often laden with the biases and subjectivities of the data that goes into them, and to the biases and subjectivities of the people who built them, right? But they're increasingly influential nodes in our society, and I think this is about to get more complicated. The way AI is shaping our information reality. This is you've probably maybe all seen this video. It's an example of what's often called deepfakes or synthetic media. It's the use of AI to create images and videos of reality, of real people and events that are not real. They are artificial. In this video, for example, this guy is making George Bush say anything. But I think soon these tools are going to go much further. They're going to create versions of reality themselves, maybe millions of different versions of an event, and then distribute those versions to a million different people in a million different ways, targeted based on our biases and our beliefs and the desire to change our behavior, right? So what does that say about all of those other problems I've mentioned when we step into that capability in that space as well? I think it's real challenges. The third effect is the sort of structural problem is the effect of monopolies. So one of the things that's emerging in this environment is that a very small number of companies have essentially become the internet. Right? So for most people in the world, everything one does in the digital space, in our digital public sphere, is filtered through one of these companies. So for example, 70% of all internet traffic goes through sites owned and operated by Google or Facebook, right? So yes, we think we have this agency when we go off into the internet, we consume all this content from different places, but actually at some point that content is being filtered through this system that I've described. And I think that's having some real economic consequence in addition to the social consequence. These dominant platforms are increasingly behaving like traditional monopolies. Right? They're essentially global monopolies. They're creating barriers to competition, to new entrants. They're acquiring startups and challengers before they can compete with them. They're buying new innovations, new IP, before it can grow into new competitor companies. And they're hiring up all industry content, top talent, right? Are all going to work for these companies. So if you add to this the competitive advantage that they have by having these very detailed profiles of everybody, the data they've collected over this first 10 years of their growth, and I think it's pretty safe to say that the next 20 years of the digital economy is going to be way less innovative than the previous 20 years. The final structural challenge here, before I get to some what we can do about this problem, sets of problems, if you agree they're problems, is that there's a real disconnect between the scale of these platforms and the way the system works and the way our democratic governance systems work. So if you think of these companies having to operate at this crazy global scale that I mentioned, there's two big implications for how we govern them. One is that their default would be to have one policy for everybody in the world. Right? So if you're running a platform that has these 2 billion users, billions of activities a day, you would rather have a terms of service agreement that applies the same way to everybody in the world. Right? That would be the most efficient way of operating your business at that scale. And second, if you look at how complex that infrastructure is, and how complex the systems are that are deciding what we all see and all of that, these companies are probably the most capable at the moment of actually governing themselves. And that presents big problems, I think, for accountability. One, a global terms of service agreement is not how we structure our laws and our rules in a society. We do it through national governments, right? Sometimes those national governments have international agreements, but our primary mechanism for accountability in our society is through national laws and regulations. And these companies want one set of rules for everybody in the world, and that's a disconnect. And even if the companies are best positioned to govern in this space, we hold our democratic governments accountable for doing those things, right? We don't want to pass off all of those responsibilities to global private companies. That's why we have national governments. And yet there's this disconnect in capability. So in my view, we're at this moment of kind of a governance crisis, an accountability crisis in the system. And probably the best analogy for it is in the lead up to the financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, where you have a largely unregulated industry, where the financial incentives of that industry are misaligned with self-regulation, right? They were just making too much money using the system that was the problem to be able to correct themselves. Add to that the fact you have monopolies in this, and not just monopolies, but publicly traded monopolies, right? Who have shareholders and boards of directors who need to make more money every quarter. And it's pretty clear we're at a moment that requires regulation and government intervention, from my view. And so that's the last thing I want to talk about, which is how we can push back against this set of problems. I think, like, just to step back from that a little bit is, like, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'd begun studying these issues when there was a real moment of optimism, and we were okay, I think, as a society, or we were right, to allow this system to emerge in a largely unregulated way. But I think we are in a different moment now, right? We've seen these social costs, and the role of governments is to try and mitigate negative social costs of the private sector and to maximize the benefits of it, right? So if that's the case, and increasingly I've been involved in sort of the policy conversations of this, right? So government's saying, okay, fine, we agree, maybe something does need to be happen about some of these social problems. What do we do about it, right? This is a new type of system we need to govern, and we don't know how to do it. And I think in that context, there are there's two different sets of policy issues and ways of governing these problems, and I just want to go through them quickly. I think there are some easy things we can do, relatively easy things we can do. These are things I think that there is some consensus emerging, particularly in Western Europe, countries that are trying this kind of thing, of things that work, and we just have to do them. One is that we need to bring real transparency to that ad market I was talking about, the data collection and micro-targeting ad market. I think individuals, that we should know who is targeting us. We should know what criteria they're targeting us with. Like, why do they want us to see the messages we are seeing, the content we are seeing? And we should be able to know if we're engaging with a human, with a bot, with an automated account, with an AI, right? We just need to bring some transparency and some sunlight to this system, which operates at the moment in almost complete opacity. The second is we clearly need new data privacy laws. For a long time, data privacy was seen as this thing that was stifling innovation, right? That people didn't care about privacy. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, has said that privacy is an evolving social norm that people don't care about anymore, right? They now care about things like openness, participation, community, not things like privacy. And I think we're having a check on that now because we're seeing some of the costs of that attitude. And in that sense, I think we need to move from this notion, or my recommendation would be to move from an idea of privacy, of protecting people's data and limiting it, into a notion of rights. That what rights do we as individuals have to how our data is used? And can we enhance those rights? And what are the benefits that can come from enhancing those rights? Should we get some share of the profit about how our data is used? Should we be able to ask for data back from companies that we've given it to maybe a decade ago? How can governments use data that their citizens are producing in the public good? Right? Should we have things like data trusts, for example, where all our data is pooled together and used for some sort of social benefit rather than for the private gain of a small number of companies? Third, I think we need to look at our competition policy. This gets at some of the monopoly issues, taxation issues. I think it's pretty clear that, for example, that companies in the digital economy should be taxed not for where their company is based, but for where the users that used or purchased the services are based. In Germany, for example, Google pays more in fines than it does in tax, right? And Google's a huge part of the German economy. So like, that just doesn't make sense. And I think there's some relatively easy ways to solve that problem. And there's this, you probably saw Elizabeth Warren has announced that antitrust and trust busting is going to be a core of her presidential platform. So I think we're starting to see this, the reemergence of the idea that we should be breaking up these companies. The challenge there is that antitrust takes a very, very long time, and it's really complicated. It could take a decade or 15, 20 years to break up. any one of these companies, even if you think that's a good idea. And the technologies are evolving so quickly that that's sort of irrelevant, right? That time frame is irrelevant. So there's actually a bunch of, I think there's general competition policy things you could do instead of breaking them up that would have a big effect. You could sort of restrict them from acquiring new companies that are ultimately their competitors, right? You could allow individuals to take their data and move them to another company. The data the company holds, the profiles, take them to another company. And finally, I think there's some things we need to do to help journalism in this space. Journalism is ultimately a market failure right now in many countries. The market has failed in being able to support this, what is ultimately a public good, the production of reliable information in our society. And this is really controversial because it means governments supporting journalists in some way. And we've seen in Canada that's a really controversial thing to try and do. But I think there's some ways we can get at that and probably incentivize public journalism, for example, help public broadcasters more, allow journalism to be nonprofit, that sort of thing. So the final thing I'll say, and I'll just end on this, is that those are kind of like the easy things we can do. Whether we're going to do them, I think, is up for debate still. But there's also some things that we just don't have the answers to. And I want to leave you on those because I think it shows how entrenched and problematic some of these issues are. One is that I think we need to figure out and talk about how we're going to regulate speech at scale globally on these platforms. So we've kind of transferred speech in society, or a big piece of it, into this new space that has different rules and is regulated in different ways. And this is disconnected from how, we can talk about non-democratic countries, and autocratic countries too. What I'm talking about is in democracies. But we have established the rules for governing speech in our own society. Canada hate speech laws that emerged over time. We've had long national debates about what should be allowed to be said in public, what is liable to be said, who's liable for speech in public. And these rules are very difficult to apply on platforms when it's an algorithm and a scaling global system that is deciding what is allowed to be said. And I think we're going to need to come to terms with that. And I'm not sure what that's going to look like. So I think democratic governments ultimately decide if their speech laws are enforceable and applicable and appropriate for this digital system. The second kind of wicked problem here is who's liable for what's said online. It used to be that a publication was liable, right? So if I'm a newspaper and I publish hate speech, or I personally libel a company or an individual, I as the publication, or my company as the publication, is responsible for that, right? That is not the case on the internet. And it's not the case because we've given platforms something called safe harbor, which is as these platforms were growing, they said, look, we are not deciding, we are a neutral platform. We are not deciding who's saying what. We can't be responsible for every crazy person that says something crazy on our platform. We'll never be able to grow. And so there's this real economic innovation and economic growth argument to exempting them from liability. And that model, which started in the US, has spread internationally. We have a version of it in Canada. Is that right? Right? Should these companies be exempt from any liability for what is said? And if we do impose liability on them, what does that look like? How do we enforce it? What are the fines for it? And I don't think we have good answers to that yet because it's really complicated. And I can talk more about what it might look like later if you're interested. Third wicked challenge, almost done here, is that we're just beginning to talk about how to hold these AI systems accountable. And I've been talking about this from the perspective of the information space, right? Like how we all share and get information. But I think this exact same AI governance and accountability debate is happening in other sectors. In the health sector, for example, in the financial sector, in how we fight crime, in the policing sector, in the criminal justice system, using AI to sentence, to develop sentences, for example. And we just are not there yet in how we're going to bring AI into our norms and regulations and laws of our society. And that's something we have to figure out. And the final thing is that if you look at how how disconnected our global governance infrastructure is from these set of problems. I think there's something we have to address there. 50 years ago, the world came together after World War II to build a global governance architecture, right? We're called the Bretton Woods institutions. And they were ultimately established to regulate the flow of capital around the world, the way money was going to flow around the world. And these set the rules for globalization, right? We can critique them, we can certainly debate them, the effect they had, positive or negative, but these were the rules that drove or that allowed globalization to emerge. And I think there's a real question now if we need a new set of those institutions. What might a Bretton Woods infrastructure look like for the data economy, for managing the flow of data rather than capital around the world? And I think that is a real open question that we need to get to. So I began with this idea of moral panic. Is it a moral panic or is it a real set of concerns? I personally believe this is a legitimate set of concerns. We've begun this, or we've embarked on this, what is now a 20-year experiment in immersing ourselves, our society, our democracy, into a set of digital technologies. And we are now starting to see that in addition to all the benefits of those technologies, all the economic activity, all the connection, all the empowerment, all the new voices that have been empowered, there are also some negative costs. And so the question now, I think, is whether we allow it to continue in an unregulated way and absorb those costs and say, okay, this is just part of doing business, this is part of living in this digital economy and getting all those benefits, or whether we try and figure out how we're going to govern this space. And I would argue that we should do the latter. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was such an interesting and, I will say it, scary talk as well. I wonder, since we have some time here for Q&A, if there's anyone who would like to ask a question of Dr. Taylor Owen. And we have our first candidate.
Hi, Professor Owen. Thanks for coming to speak with us today. I agree with you. I think this is less a moral panic and more a genuine public health issue. Yeah. And I think you made a very strong claim for the importance of sort of top-down regulation and transparency. But I wonder if there's another aspect of this that's important. Because as individuals, we're not just the victims of these effects, but we're also the perpetrators of them. Because we are vectors for this disinformation. And I think probably even more effective vectors than targeted ads are, because of course you're so much more likely to believe something that you hear from someone you know. So I guess my question is, how do we inoculate the population so that even if we cannot prevent the spread of these ideas and things online, we can prevent them from sort of infecting the individuals in our population? Like, can education be a crucial aspect of this to protect our minds?
Yeah, and I think like often the first place governments go and the private sector has gone is this idea that digital literacy is the biggest solution to inoculate us, right? And I actually like the term inoculation because it does get at the fact that this is a public health issue, right? Like this is in some ways a disease in the infrastructure that we need to be inoculated against. And I think to a certain extent that is true if it happens at a far more vast scale than we're currently doing it, right? Usually what digital literacy campaigns are like somebody goes into a classroom and gives a half-an-hour lesson on how to fact-check a piece of content on the internet to see if it's fake or not, right? Like that is not if that is what we mean by digital literacy, I don't think it's going to work. What could help is teaching people how this infrastructure works, right? So that when they go open up their Facebook feed, what they're seeing is designed to make them angry, right? So not necessarily teaching them how to decide if something's true or not, because that's going to be very difficult. Often this stuff is, often misinformation or the stuff designed to affect us is true, right? Or it's not all false, but it's positioned in a way and targeted to us in a way that's designed to evoke emotional response. And I think if we start looking at everything we see through that lens and saying, man, that Facebook post pissed me off. But why did it piss me off, right? And was it designed to piss me off? And should I be reacting like that? And should I do the thing that that emotional response is evoking, right? So I think that kind of critical lens is really important. But I'm not sure it's an open question to me whether the system is just so powerful, particularly the micro-targeting, the AI-driven micro-targeting system is so powerful that we as individuals have very much agency against it, right? So if an artificial intelligence system is using the data, say 20 or 30,000 variables about my life, about everything I've done in the physical and virtual world for the past decade, and is using it to design a message that's designed to slightly change my behavior, is that something I as an individual am going to be able to see? I don't know, right? And so, yes, digital literacy is really important, but there's also a structural problem. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Does that help?
No, I agree. It also raises the question of whether we should be deliberately doing false things ourselves online to throw the AI off track. Like if I should go and Google opera all day, so that the AI thinks I love opera. Yeah,
that's a very interesting point. There's lots of movements around that, and how to throw these systems off. The challenge is that the data sets are so comprehensive that and that is really the core of part of this challenge, right? Is you just have such a monopoly over who owns these data about our lives, and once you've pieced enough of them together, it's really difficult to throw them off because there's such a comprehensive picture of each of our lives.
So I'm just going to piggyback on that too. So in terms of what can be done, so at the personal education at the government level, so at the personal level is an option like to basically say, you as a parent have to, up to a certain age, just not allow your kids on. And if they go on, you basically control what they're going on. And then in terms of the education level, just to give you an example of this educational literacy. So my daughters go to the York District School Board. So they've started a new campaign where they educate them about Facebook and Google and sort of give them warnings about what they should be watching out for, what they shouldn't do, and what they should do. So that's sort of one campaign that's been started. And at the government level, the interesting stuff that's going on in countries like Russia and China, where they've said, we have an approach. How we're going to control this is we're basically going to take control over the internet. So we're going to basically decide for you what you should be watching, what you can watch, what you can't watch, because we have to stay in power. So Putin isn't going to be able to stay in power if this online stuff continues, but if he controls it. So just wanted your thoughts on those.
Yeah, so there is a real there's a legitimate concern that we do not want governments deciding in general terms what is allowed to be said, what is the contours of debate in our society, beyond certain sort of reasonable limitations, hate speech, libel content, that kind of thing, right? And the challenge is the one you put your finger on, which is that there is an alternate model emerging of the internet and the way governments are going to interact with the internet. And it is an autocratic model, right? The Chinese government, for example, a lot of people said for a long time that they could never control the internet, right? That the internet was going to be ultimately democratizing to China because people would want the things it offered. They'd want the freedom it offered, and they'd find a way to get it, right? And they actually proved that wrong. And they proved it wrong by building a set of tools and services that mimicked all the good things that Western platforms provided. So there was a version of Twitter, there's a version of Amazon, there's a version of Google Search, right? Like all the things that people might want, they just said, all right, we'll just replicate that so people are happy and using these services to a certain degree. But we're going to build another aspect to the system, we're going to allow all of these different tech layers to speak to each other, and so we can collect data in a centralized way by the government, and then use it as a tool of social control, right? So that's the autocratic tech stack that's emerged. And that is very attractive to other autocratic governments and increasingly to a liberal-leaning democracies. So this model is getting exported. So I think we have to figure out on our side, in democratic countries, how to make this system work in a democracy. And that means not using these tools as tools of social control. It means being building much more accountability into them. It means making the platforms accountable and transparent. Because if we don't, that other model is going to spread even further. So I agree with you. There's this tendency for governments to appropriate tools and to use them in ways that benefit them. But the pushback against that has to be, we need to build this democracy into this infrastructure if we're going to compete against that other model. And I think you saw that with for example, previous work I did was on the way governments the surveillance infrastructure emerged in governments to try and shape the behavior of citizens. So we are not immune from wanting to do this. But I think we need to push back against it.
If I may just ask, on that point, is that the case to be made for the companies wanting to have international rules, is that you don't have any particular nation states that are kind of hijacking the technology in really negative ways? Yeah. Is that their thinking, or?
Yeah. I mean, that is an argument that some people are starting to make, is that if the Western-based platform companies want to compete globally against the Chinese-based companies, they better be a part of making the rules,
right.
That alternate rule book, right? Now that's a new phenomenon, because I think up until very recently, they thought they were going to be the global tech infrastructure. So Google was going to move into search in China, for example. Right. They may still, but there's been a lot of pushback against that. Facebook has just said the other day they don't see a path forward in China. And that is a big admission, I think. That's starting to say that this is going to be a fragmentation, and that they are going to be the tech infrastructure for the rest of the world. And if that's the case, they better hope some rules emerge that allow them to continue to operate in all these other markets. Because there's a pushback against that, right? Like Europe, the European Union, for example, is very aggressively regulating these companies, in part to push them out of their markets, I think. So I think these companies would be wise to actively participate in the development of these regulations rather than fighting against them, because that could end up being counterproductive.
Right. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about artificial intelligence. So when we talk about technology, invariably when people say technology, we're talking about the ubiquity of mobile computing platforms and also social communication platforms built on those. For quite a few years now, all of what you're talking about has been underpinned by the development of artificial intelligence. And as we move to artificial general intelligence, there's like a growing voice. People like Elon Musk are coming out and saying, artificial intelligence is posing the greatest threat to human beings, and is that voice, is what Elon Musk says about the unethical or the potential unethical development of artificial intelligence, is that hyperbole, or is that a real thing? And if it is, how do governments regulate to make sure that AI is developed ethically when the expertise that they need in order to regulate it lies within companies who are developing it and setting it to purposes that they determine?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one I don't have a very incomplete answer to, because I think it is one of these, as I mentioned at the end, one of these wicked challenges, right? That this set of technologies around AI, various uses of AI and types of AI, are becoming embedded in in all of our technologies, right? They're becoming embedded in our society before we've had a chance to really think through how we're going to regulate them. Now, there's a debate about generalized intelligence and whether it could pose an existential threat to humanity and that whole argument that Musk has been a part of. And I don't have feelings one way or the other about that, but you don't have to think AI is an existential threat to the future of humanity to see that there's some problems in how it's being used already. And so I think we need to focus on those, right? So how are AI systems biased against racialized people, for example? How are AI systems being used in the criminal justice system to give pardons to certain races and increase the sentencing of others, right? How is facial recognition being used in a biased way? How is AI driving our financial sector in ways that are having negative economic costs? How is it going to be used in our insurance sector to decide the insurance rates in real time based on our behaviors, right? Like these are things that are happening now, not 20 years in the future, but now that we can look at and use as the lens for how we want to govern these systems. And when you do, you have to sort of unpack what they are. They are a combination of the data that's inputted to them and the way the algorithms process those data and lead to social outcomes. And those are both things we can engage with from a government side, right? Is the data being used in these systems itself biased? Where is it collected? It is embedded with the biases of society already, so that you put it in an AI, the AI just mirrors those biases that we already have. And how is that AI making those decisions? We can interrogate that and force transparency on that. So, I mean, the existential threat issue is interesting. I mean, as an aside, Musk was doing an interview recently where someone said, like, I thought you were really scared about AI. Why are you now building one of Elon Musk's companies is a brain to AI interface he's trying to build, right? Like a mesh that will sit on your brain and will allow you to kind of communicate with an AI. And someone asked him, like, why are you building this if you thought this was this existential threat? And he said, well, you know, I tried to convince governments they should govern AI for 2 or 3 years, and it didn't work. So instead, I think humanity just needs to merge with AI and embed ourselves in the AI, right? So, like, which seems like a fairly significant leap in that we couldn't govern it for 2 years, therefore. Like, so, I mean, I would take some of the things he says with a grain of salt on this, but the real problems are present and now and increasing as we embed these technologies in our lives.
Do we have any more questions? You want to step up to the mic?
I'm a little short, but okay.
You can take that out.
Just tip it?
Yeah, or bend it back, yeah.
Okay. So for somebody who is pretty submerged in technology and for somebody whose kids will also be, what are some of the things that I can do to, I guess, lower the negative effects of the sociological things of technology?
I would throw that back to you. Like, are there things you do?
Like, what do you mean?
Like, is this something you're aware of and trying to mitigate yourself, like your use of technologies?
Yeah, well, I know the effects of cyberbullying, and so I'm very careful of that. I'm very careful of what I say on the internet. I don't really put my own opinion out there. But, like, I guess just what are other things I can do to make it a safer environment for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hope there will be a new set of norms that emerge on how people, a generation growing up immersed in these technologies, view them and work out social behaviors in response to them, right? But it really worries me, right? Like, I just can't imagine being in high school with everybody I knew on social media all the time. I just can't fathom it. Like, high school was is a horrendous enough place in all sorts of ways to begin with, but then add on a layer of what happens on these and the addiction of these platforms and everybody communicating on back channels, and like that just seems like a horrible thing to me.
I'll let you know that my favorite part about high school was leaving.
You're right, and I don't think you're alone. That's not a new phenomenon, right? Like that's been happening for a long time. But I do think there's something different about the social interaction that's enabled,
Yeah.
right? And we are starting to get a clearer picture of the effects that's having, right?
Yeah.
Like is definitely leading to increased depression and all that kind of stuff. That's real. So I don't know. I mean, there's a big thing about how the norms that parents are setting, for sure. I mean, so my generation, for example, that all has young kids now, are big culprits of this, are in front of their screens as much as their kids are, and that's setting a pattern. What you allow someone to be, the technologies you allowed kids to use, is going to become an increasing thing. When should kids get phones? What should be on those phones? So I don't have a good answer for you, because I think it's a really wicked problem. I was saying somewhere before that I've been speaking with, there's a great organization called Civics, which goes into high schools and teaches kids about democracy, students about democracy. And they're now teaching digital literacy. And this is a question we have all the time is, what should you be teaching a 13-year-old about this system in a way that might benefit their health, the information they receive? And what I ultimately come down to is what I mentioned before, is that we have to think, we can't just accept these things in our lives. We have to recognize that they are designed to do things to us. They are designed to addict us. They are designed to make us react in a way to other people, right? So that maybe the first step is just an awareness of that. But I'm sorry I don't have a better answer.
No, it's okay.
Don't engage.
Yeah, I mean, I think ironically,
The high school kids
don't use them. Yeah, I mean,
use any of
I think that's partly where we're going. I mean,
older and you can
Yeah.
make better choices. Don't
yeah, I mean, I think it's,
I know it's crazy, but
it's not, I don't think it's crazy. I mean, well, so there's a story in the New York Times recently about how the big trend in Silicon Valley is not to allow their kids devices, right? Which tells you everything you need to know, right? That in the heart of the people building these tools are not letting their kids use them, right? So yes, that will be a part of this. But I don't think age inoculates you from these phenomena either, right? So at some point, we either have to change the nature of the tools, because at some point people are going to start engaging that and they are going to be vulnerable. We know that, for example, the worst perpetrators of spreading misinformation are baby boomers, right? So digital literacy for them too, probably. But also because they're using tools that make the problem worse. So, thanks.
Anyone else?
You touched slightly on data and also on geopolitical issues. How do you see the Huawei issue playing out, perhaps for Canada or the US, and the fact and the argument whether to ban the use of those technologies and the switching mechanisms, or there's some in the private sector who say, well, allow it, and that way we can at least see what's in it. What's your view on this?
I mean, I think that framing is the nature of the problem, right? Is it better to bring this infrastructure into our governance system and demand of it a certain degree of accountability and transparency? And is that possible, right? Or is there still a vulnerability if you do that? And I don't know the answer to that. I think we are right, though, to be critical of building, because of some of the things I talked about, how the Chinese government views the internet and digital infrastructure. I think we are right to be skeptical of embedding that in what is going to be the next 20 or 30 years of our communications technology. Like, does that go to banning? I don't know. I would suspect it does.
It seems to be that's the argument that most in Europe and in the US are going in that direction, potentially Canada as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and the biggest push for us is that the Five Eyes countries are almost all now on board, and I'm not sure they will allow us to participate in that network if we have a perceived vulnerability in our infrastructure. But we're in a different place than they are, because we are, compared to those countries, we are more embedded in or immersed in the Chinese economy to a certain way. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have a feeling one way or the other?
I think it's probably more sensible, at least temporarily, to not allow those technologies to be embedded, given their links with the regime there.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean permanently, but perhaps temporarily to assess.
And you have to realize that, I mean, this is, you mentioned geopolitics, it is geopolitics. Huawei was given $100 billion by the Chinese state to fund their global expansion. Right? So it's not an accident we have Huawei handsets competing against Apple and Android handsets in the Western economy. It was a subsidized move by the state, which should at least make us look critically at it, I think.
Any further questions? One more here.
I just want to know, what are your thoughts on like some actual like tangible ways that governments or regulators can kind of regulate these kind of like the tech industry to make sure that those biases don't exist in the technology itself?
God, that again, similar to the AI question, that is kind of the wicked challenge here. There's a big debate in sort of the AI governance conversation about what are the best leverage points in, and I think the answer is not going to be one of them, right? But the idea of the data themselves being biased, that are the inputs into these systems, is probably the biggest governance lever we can push back against. And I mean, I think the conversation about data trusts that I mentioned is really important. Right now, we have a set of technologies being built on what was ultimately a free-for-all for data, right? We had a period of time that we're still in, but I think maybe coming out of, where data was seen as just this free good that everybody provided and companies collected. And that allowed these huge data sets, the types of data sets you need to train AI, to be concentrated amongst a few companies. And I think we're coming to an understanding that these data are very powerful, that how they are constituted and constructed has a big impact, right? If they themselves are biased, then the outcomes of these systems are biased. So maybe there's a role for governance or for governments in creating different kinds of training data sets. So data sets, for example, in a city, right? There's all sorts of data citizens in a municipality give off that could be used to provide better services, to provide better healthcare, to train or to guide our transportation systems. But to do so, the data has to have integrity. And maybe the government or some governance system should be determining the integrity of that data rather than allowing it all to be collected by private companies and then put in a vault that we can't see. Right? So that's probably the most powerful way in, I think.
Any last thoughts? That's probably a good note to end things on.
Thank you so much.
So please join me in thanking again Dr. Taylor Owen. Very interesting talk.
Thanks.
Just a reminder too to please stick around. We'll have a little reception afterwards. Lots of food over there. If you have to run, grab some food before you run. We have lots. Thanks very much for coming out. And thank you again.
Thank you. That was okay.
Yeah. I mean, it opens up so many questions.